Hey, listeners, welcome back to Story in 5 Pages. If you're new here, welcome. Come on in. Don't be shy. For those who are new here, on this channel, we invite people to send in their own miracle stories, spiritual encounters, and other things of that nature. Today's story is from Gigi, Angel Application.
My mom got married to my father just out of high school. He was 30 years her senior. She was 18. Before they got married, they made an agreement that he would be the breadwinner and she would be the caretaker. They had four beautiful children together, all girls. When my mom was in her mid 30s, my father died of cancer. Then the financial responsibility to take care of us girls fell on her. Being married straight out of high school, my mom didn't have any skills that would allow her to earn a decent living for herself and four children. Even with no skills, my mom found a low paying receptionist job during the day that didn't require her to do much except answer the phone and take messages.
Hello,
She
thank you for
started
calling our
taking
company. How may I
classes
help
at the
you?
local community college during
Please
the
hold.
evening. She eventually got an associate's degree and later on to get a bachelor's and a master's. But her overall education journey makes for an entirely different story. Back to the story at hand. Working and going to school put a strain on my mom. She often told myself and my three sisters that not going to college immediately after high school was not an
Please
option.
listen to me.
She said we always needed a backup plan just in case.
You have to have
And at the
your
time,
own.
we didn't question exactly what that meant. We just went with it. She made sure that we stayed on track at school and were accepted into some of the most prestigious colleges. She supported us financially and emotionally and saw to it that all of us graduated. On my graduation day from college, she said, "I'm really proud of you and the girls. I just want to say that I stressed the importance of you all getting advanced degrees because I didn't want you to end up like me, finding yourself needing to take care of your family without having many options."
You cannot depend on a
I didn't
man.
fully realize the impact of that statement because, one, I had just graduated from college, two, I didn't even have a boyfriend, and three, I wasn't looking to be in a serious relationship. So what? They didn't mean nothing to me. 4 years later, at 25 years old, I did meet who I thought was the man of my dreams. 2 years after that, we got married, and 2 years later, I gave birth to a precious son. I was 29 years old. Even before our son was born, my husband insisted that I stay at home and let him support me financially. He knew I was a college graduate, and I was even working at the time, but he said I didn't need to work. My main focus should be supporting him emotionally and keeping a clean house. To which I agreed. I was working as an editor for a local newspaper, a position I had held since I graduated from college. I really didn't want to give up my job, but I reasoned that a good woman would stand by her husband's side. So I worked out my resignation at the newspaper and became the dutiful little housewife. My boss was unhappy, by the way, and he warned me that my leaving would not be forgiven. Life didn't change drastically for me with the birth of our son. I was already used to being at home. Now I just had company. I couldn't have been happier, or so I thought. By the time our son was 2 years old, I noticed that my husband's attitude and affection for me had become quite chilling. He spent less time in the home and more time with his friends or somewhere other than home. When our son turned 3, my husband announced that he was moving out. I left to go visit one of my sisters, and when I returned, all traces of him were gone. He had erased any signs that he had ever been there. I knew things had not been good for us for a good while, but I had no idea they had reached a point of separation and that I would be in the same predicament as mom, left to raise a child on my own. This is when I began to really appreciate that my mom would not let us give up on the backup plan. I didn't think I would ever need it, but I was so grateful that I had some options. I have to admit, him leaving the way he did left me in a bind. Since he was the breadwinner, I suddenly found myself strapped for cash. I didn't want to return to my old job because that would require begging. I wanted a fresh start. I brainstormed and thought of what types of jobs I felt I might be good at maneuvering. And as I watched our son running around in the room playing, oblivious to any problems, I thought, I like teaching my son. Maybe I should try to get a job in a local school. I got on the computer and looked up the application process for several school systems within a 50-mile radius. I printed up applications for each one of them and carefully filled them out. The majority of them wanted me to submit 3 different character references. I told myself I'm going to set these applications aside until I can come up with who I want to ask to complete the accompanying reference forms. I put them in the dresser drawer where I kept all my important documents. I had a small safe, but I never used it. I figured anyone ever wanted to rob us, they would go for the safe first. Seeing that this process might take a while, I applied for and accepted a few temporary assignments with the local temp agency. The pay wasn't great, but it was enough to keep gas in the car and buy groceries here and there. Plus, I got paid every week. That was a bonus. My landlord was good friends with my uncle. They played golf together at the country club. Out of respect for my uncle, he wrote up a temporary contract that allowed me to pay $50 per week out of my temp pay, and then when I procured permanent employment, I would pay the balance of back rent plus the current rent due. And even though it sounds like everything was working out okay, I still felt stressed and pressured to find that permanent and better paying job ASAP. After about 2 months of working through the temp agency, the teaching applications I filled out were still sitting in my safekeeping drawer. I called a few acquaintances and arranged to have brunch with each of them on 3 different Saturdays, with the hopes of having all of the references completed and submitted by the end of the month. My acquaintances were all much older than me. One was my former teacher that I used to babysit for quite a bit. Another was a long-standing church member that allowed me to assist her with her children's Sunday school class. The last one was a daycare director that let me volunteer during the summer to watch the children. My plan was to present the reference forms during the brunches and ask each of them to complete the forms and return them to me. Before I could even have the first brunch meeting, I got a call from one of the school systems
Yes, hello. May I speak to
asking
Mrs.
me if
George,
I was still
please?
interested in being a teacher. And if so, would I like to schedule the first of a 2-part interview? As we spoke, I held the wireless landline in my hand and ran to the dresser drawer. I saw the incomplete applications were still where I had left them. Mechanically, I made the appointment for the following day. I was stunned to get the call because the applications were still exactly where I left them. I couldn't help but thank God for my good fortune because He was my only explanation of how this could happen. The first interview I went to was with Human Resources. I was told that if the interview went well, Human Resources would dispatch my approved application to the principals of different schools. I chose not to take the completed application with me because I still didn't have the references yet. The lady at the interview was rather cold in her approach. She asked me a series of questions and frowned at each of my responses. It was a very uncomfortable scenario for me. I tried not to fidget and just continued through the process. At the end, she said, if we feel you can be an asset to the school system and if there is a position for you, someone will contact you. I smiled and thanked her for the interview, but I felt less than confident that I would ever hear from anyone. That school system was about an hour's drive from my house, I told myself if I got that job, I could use my travel to and from as much needed therapeutic time praying and praising God. But I didn't expect to get another call. Boy, was I wrong. When I got home, I had one message on the answering machine. It was from the principal of one of the schools. He wanted to schedule an interview as soon as possible. I called him back and arranged to go see him the next day. That meant 2 interviews back to back. When I arrived at the school, I went into the office and told the receptionist I was there for an interview. The principal came out of one of the back offices and shook my hand. He ushered me back into the office and instructed the receptionist to hold all calls. He said, just take messages or tell them to call back. I noticed he had a folder in his hand. Mind you, I still hadn't turned in an application. He opened the folder and sifted through several sheets of paper. Then he said, Mrs. George, I'm going to be honest with you. Your record speaks for itself. I'm not going to go through the formalities of this interview. I'm just going to come right out and offer you this position. He picked up a piece of paper outlining beginning pay and benefits. He watched me carefully as my eyes rolled down the page. It wasn't the best offer, but then I was going to be a beginning teacher with no teaching experience. It would allow me to provide for myself and my son. Plus, the benefits were great. 100% insurance coverage for both of us, paid vacations over winter and spring breaks, and instant membership in the school union. Also, the pay will be increasing each year as I made my way up the teaching experience scale. I told him, I'll take it. To which he replied, welcome aboard. I think you'll find in the long run, you made the right decision. I walked out of the office smiling. The receptionist smiled back at me. Welcome aboard, Mrs. George. On the entire drive back home, I just praised God and thanked Him for this opportunity. When I got back home, I had another message on the answering machine. The voice said, Mrs. George, this is Stephanie from the school system. You had an interview yesterday with Human Resources. Principal Nexler indicated you had accepted a position. I need to get you set up in our system, and for the life of me, I cannot find your application. I know I had it. I had it in my hands. I've looked at it. I faxed it to Principal Nexler. Do you mind stopping by the office to complete another application? It's just a formality. You already have the job. And don't worry about the references. I'm sure I will run across them later. As she spoke, I ran to the dresser drawer again and saw all the applications still right where I had left them. I told her that I would complete another one. After hanging up the phone, I called my mom and explained what had just happened. She said, didn't you know angels can come in all sorts of forms? God sends angels to be whoever and whatever you need when you need it. This was nearly 20 years ago, and I'm still at the same school with the same teaching position, but of course, earning more money. Oh, before I forget, as for the brunch dates, for the recommendations, I kept each one of them, but instead of taking reference forms, I took my son and introduced him to them. And I asked each of them if they would be his godmother and become a regular fixture in our lives, to which they all happily agreed.